I'm guessing everyone was waiting for inflation news because we are simply had enough of the high interest rate causing all kind of stress. We finally had the report for the latest January inflation number and it is better than anticipated. So what all this mean going forward? Let's break it down in this video right after this. Hey, welcome back to another video on the AV Team Real Estate channel. I'm Antonio and I am a local real estate agent in the GTA. If you have been enjoying the weekly video from this channel, don't forget to hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel so that it can be shared with more people who want to get updated on the real estate market in Toronto. Greatly appreciate it. If you have any inquiries about real estate, don't hesitate to contact me via the first link in the description down below. A measure of how quickly prices are rising is called inflation. Since inflation may significantly affect your way of life, it is crucial to keep an eye on it. You are impacted by inflation in two ways. It first lowers your money buying power. This implies that when prices increase, your dollar will eventually purchase less and less. Second, increased interest rates may result from inflation in Canada, which may affect your capacity to take out loans or make investments. A moderate and steady rate of inflation is often beneficial to the economy. It promotes investment and expenditure, both of which boost the economy. But excessive inflation may not always be a good thing. It may result in more uncertainty and costly interest rates. It is actually not fresh news off the press, but I would like to address it and break it down what it really means. Before the CPI announcement, many economists and analysts predicted that there would have been a higher inflation number compared to the last reported inflation number in December. However, it turned out better than anticipated and it was updated on February 20th of 2024, where inflation declined to 2.9% compared to 3.4% in December and 3.1% in November and October. Overall, we can take a look at this graph for the past 10 years starting in 2013. We had a relatively high from 2013 all the way to 2017 inflation rate of just above 1 and under 3, and we can see a huge dip during the pandemic in 2020. We all know that the money printing happened during the pandemic, and as a result of the reopening in 2021, inflation started to break the 3% mark and went as high as 8.13 in June of 2022. And then the Bank of Canada has no choice but to start the interest rate hike, and we saw the decline again, and we were hovering in the 3% mark during last year from news of the holding rate and such, but finally this month with the lowest since reopening in 2021. I would say inflation is the talk of the town. We could see an interest rate cut based on what this number tells us. But at the same time, we have many mixed news stories and perspectives on why the Bank of Canada might not cut the rate this quickly. Let's take a look at how the inflation was calculated and understand how Canada interprets this inflation rate. Basically, inflation is calculated based on the price of 8 categories of goods and services: food, shelter, household, clothing, transport, health, recreation, alcohol, tobacco, and cannabis. This is the list provided on the WOWA website, the contribution of each CPI category to Canada January 2024 inflation rate. We can see the biggest contribution to the inflation prices is shelter at 28.34%, food at 16.65%, and transportation at 16.44%. Then we have household at 14.36%, then recreation at 9.92%, then health at 3.7%, then clothing at 4.6%, and finally alcohol, tobacco, cannabis at 4.53%. If you ask me, it is no surprise that shelter will be the #1 contributor to the high inflation rate in January 2024, since the high interest is costing incredible mortgage expenses. The main reason we saw for the first time the consumer price index reading dropped to 2.9% was mainly due to the lower prices, a 4% annual decline in gas prices, and a fall in groceries prices, which came in at 3.4% in January compared to 4.7% in December. Here is the bar graph where it shows that shelter has the highest contribution at 60.7%, food is second at 22.6%, and transportation is third at 6.9%. Since shelter has the highest weight in contributing to the inflation rate, let's explore the shelter component. The shelter inflation is currently at 28%, and it is mainly divided divided into three components, with the largest of all at 18% in owned accommodations and 7% in rented accommodations and 3% in water, fuel, and electricity. What is exactly owned accommodation, you may ask? It has 6 components as follows: mortgage interest costs, homeowners replacement costs, property taxes and other special charges, owner's home and mortgage insurance, homeowners maintenance and repair, and other owned accommodations expenses. In other words, all the costs are owned by homeowners. As for the rented accommodation, it is the rent that has a contribution of about 7%. Although we have seen the rent cool off a bit, it has remained high. Lastly, we have about 3% which come from the water, fuel, and electricity. Let's put that in perspective. If the interest rate remains high, the mortgage interest cost will go up, and therefore the inflation rate will go up, since shelter is 60% of the 2.9% inflation rate. This is like a threshold. No matter how much more we raise the interest rate, that will also cause the inflation to go up. Like many videos I spoke in the past, it is counterintuitive to keep raising the interest rate when that is also causing the inflation to rise. The TD Economist summed it up with this highlight that they published on February 20th. The Bank of Canada inflation problem is mostly a housing issue. With shelter inflation accounting for more than half of overall inflation, this has become the biggest hurdle preventing the Bank of Canada from cutting rates. We map out 3 scenarios to determine how the Bank of Canada could influence the path of shelter inflation based on when it decides to cut rates. We find the Bank of Canada will have little ability to quickly cool off shelter prices, meaning that structurally higher inflation in Canada will persist. This argues for the Bank of Canada to start looking past the influence of shelter inflation, as it has under past regimes. For as long as the Bank of Canada continues to focus on inflation metrics which are being held up by shelter inflation, Canadians will suffer under the weight of high interest rates. The takeaway from this is that TD Economist admits that the Bank of Canada shelter is an inflation problem due to housing issues. There is no denying that mortgage interest plays a big factor in why inflation is staying high. But what's interesting is that if we calculate Canadian inflation using the same weight as the Fed's preferred metric, Canadian inflation will be at just 2.1% year over year. That says TD. Even the Bank of Canada former preferred measure of core inflation, the CPIX, which takes out mortgage costs and other volatile items, is at 2.5% year over year. This is further proof that raising the interest rate is quite counterintuitive if the purpose is to lower inflation. That is the question that Governor McLean is considering. Does a premature rate cut by him fuel demand-side inflation once more? Alternatively, does the pass-through of higher policy rates keep rent inflation and mortgage interest costs at all-time high if he delayed the rate cuts? Funny enough, the TD projection about house price inflation is quite interesting. Basically, it has 3 projections based on this year in 2024, and to be honest, it wasn't that surprising. First, they made projections based on when the interest cuts will take place this year. The earliest will be in March, then June, and the latest is in December. Bottom line, TD is predicting a rate cut happening in 2024. This is the chart provided for the forecast beyond the 2024. As you can see, the house price inflation started just under 4 at the beginning of 2023 and was gradually going south to just above -2 and was on the way up at the beginning of 2024. We can see the forecast in a dotted line. Let's start with the March cuts, which are less than few weeks away. I would say that will be the least likely thing to happen due to the history we had in 2023 when Bank of Canada attempted to just hold the rate, and during that spring the market went frenzy, and for that reason I think they will try not to make the same mistake and delay the interest rate cut. Compared to other projections, you can see the home prices trending up the fastest. Moving on to summer June cuts, pretty much the same story, but obviously it is delayed, but home prices are still rising in the projection. And you guessed right, if they decide to cut during the winter in December, it is just getting more delayed. But overall, it is all projecting that home prices will go back up to where they started in 2023. Bottom line, shelter inflation will continue to be the problem, and it isn't going away no matter how quickly it decides to cut rates. Will the Bank of Canada look past the shortcomings created by housing inflation and instead focus on the health health of the broad economy. It is clear from recent central bank communication that the Bank of Canada isn't ready to do so. Do you agree with the TD analysis, and will the home prices be more manageable once the rate cuts happen? It remains to be seen, but it will be more interesting year than 2023. Buckle up and let's see what happens. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you like enough, please like the video and consider subscribing to the channel for more real estate content in Toronto. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.